The California sun warmed the small house in Hawthorne. Inside, a young boy sat close to the family record player. His name was Brian Wilson. He was quiet and sensitive, but inside his head, a world of sound was exploding. He could hear music in everything. The hum of the refrigerator became a bass line. The chirping of birds turned into a melody. From a very young age, Brian was different. He was almost deaf in one ear, a result of a blow from his father. This only made him listen more intensely with the other. He focused on the sounds around him, trying to piece them together into something beautiful, something whole. His father, Murray Wilson, was a tough man. He was a frustrated musician himself. He pushed his sons, Brian, Dennis and Carl, to succeed. Sometimes his methods were harsh. He wanted them to be perfect, but he also gave them a gift. He filled the house with music. Brian listened to everything from the soaring harmonies of the Four Freshmen to the driving rhythms of Chuck Berry. He would sit at the piano for hours, picking out the chords he heard on the radio. He wasn't just copying the songs. He was taking them apart and putting them back together in new ways. He was learning the language of music, a language he would soon use to speak to the world. Even in his childhood, there was a sense of something special about Brian. He could hear harmonies that no one else could. He could imagine entire orchestras in his mind. His brothers, Dennis and Carl, and their cousin Mike Love would gather around the piano. Brian would teach them the parts he had created. He would assign each person a note, building complex vocal arrangements layer by layer. It was like a puzzle, and Brian was the only one who could see the final picture. This was not just a hobby, it was a calling. Music was the way Brian made sense of the world, and the way he would one day change it. The world outside the Wilson home was one of sand, surf, and endless sunshine. It was the California dream. But for Brian, the real magic was happening indoors. It was in the vibrations of the piano strings and the blend of human voices. He was a boy with a profound gift, living in an ordinary suburban town. He didn't know it yet, but the melodies swirling in his mind would soon become the soundtrack for a generation. The sounds he created in that small room in Hawthorne would travel far beyond the California coast, carrying a message of joy, hope, and the beautiful sadness of growing up. The Beach Boys were born from a simple idea. Dennis, the surfer of the family, suggested they write a song about the sport. Brian, who was more comfortable at a piano than on a surfboard, took the challenge. He turned his brother's passion into music. With Mike Love providing the lyrics, they wrote Surfin'. The song was simple and catchy. It captured the feeling of freedom and fun that defined Southern California youth culture. They borrowed money from their parents to record it. The song became a local hit. Suddenly, the Wilson brothers and their cousin were a real band. They were the Beach Boys, and Brian was their leader. Brian was the engine behind the band's incredible rise. He was not just the main songwriter, he was the producer and arranger. While the others were out enjoying the fame, Brian was often in the studio. He was obsessed with sound. He heard things in his head that had never been put on a record before. He wanted the records to sound perfect. He would spend hours getting the right drum sound or the perfect vocal harmony. Capitol Records signed them and the hits started coming fast. Surfin' USA, Surfer Girl, I Get Around. Each song was bigger than the last. They became America's band. The early Beach Boys sound was a brilliant formula. It mixed the tight vocal harmonies of the Four Freshmen with the rock and roll energy of Chuck Berry. On top of that, Brian layered lyrics about surfing, cars, and high school romance. It was music that made you feel good. It was the sound of an endless summer. But even in these early hits, you could hear Brian's genius starting to emerge. He was experimenting with chord progressions and production techniques that were far more advanced than other pop music of the time. He was building a sonic world that was entirely his own. Behind the sunny sound, however, the pressure was building on Brian. The band was constantly touring. The record company demanded more and more hits, and his father, Murray, who was also their manager, was always pushing him harder. Brian was a sensitive soul in a demanding business. He was still just a young man, barely out of his teens, carrying the weight of a world-famous band on his shoulders. The happy music he wrote was becoming an escape from the growing anxiety he felt inside. The wave of success was thrilling, but Brian was beginning to feel like he was being pulled under by its force. Brian Wilson was more than just a songwriter. He was a true musical architect. He saw the recording studio not just as a place to capture a performance, but as an instrument itself. He became a master of production. He was inspired by Phil Spector's wall of sound, a technique that used large ensembles and layers of instruments to create a massive orchestral effect. Brian took this idea and made it his own. He began working with a group of elite Los Angeles session musicians, later known as the Wrecking Crew. These were the best players in the business, and they could bring Brian's complex ideas to life. He would walk into the studio with the entire arrangement already mapped out in his head. He would tell the French horn player what to play, then the cellist, then the drummer. He would even use unconventional instruments like bicycle bells, accordions, and Coke bottles to get the exact sound he was looking for. The musicians were amazed. Here was this young kid, not much older than 20, directing a room full of seasoned professionals with absolute confidence. He was creating symphonies for teenagers. His music was growing more complex, more emotional, and more beautiful with every session. This period saw Brian reach an incredible creative peak. At just 21 years old, he wrote, arranged, and produced I Get Around, which became the Beach Boys' first #1 hit in the United States. He was a pop music prodigy, rivaling even the great John Lennon and Paul McCartney of the Beatles. The Beatles themselves admitted they were in a friendly competition with Brian. They would listen to the latest Beach Boys record and be blown away, pushing them to try new things in their own music. Brian was setting a new standard for what a pop song could be. His genius was in his ability to blend the simple with the complex. The songs were still about girls and having fun, but the music behind the lyrics was becoming a rich tapestry of sound. He used unusual key changes and sophisticated harmonies that were more common in classical music or jazz. He layered vocals so thick they sounded like a choir. He was pushing the boundaries of pop music, transforming it from simple entertainment into a form of high art. Brian Wilson wasn't just writing hits anymore. He was composing masterpieces, creating a sound that was uniquely and unmistakably his. The constant pressure to create and tour began to take a heavy toll on Brian. In late 1964, while on a flight to a show in Houston, he had a panic attack. He broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. He just could not handle the stress of life on the road anymore. It was, honestly, a turning point. He told the band he was done with touring. From that moment, he would stay home in California and focus all his energy on writing and recording the music. The rest of the band would go on the road with a replacement, and he would create the tracks for them to sing on when they returned. This decision would change the Beach Boys and pop music forever. Freed from the demands of touring, Brian's creativity just exploded. He began to experiment with drugs, particularly marijuana and LSD, which he believed opened up his mind to new musical possibilities. He started writing songs that were more personal and introspective. The lyrics moved away from cars and surfing and began to explore themes of love, loss, and the anxieties of becoming an adult. He was growing up, and he really wanted the music to grow up with him. Brian was no longer content with just making hit singles. He wanted to create a complete artistic statement, an album that flowed together as one cohesive piece of work. This new direction led to the creation of the album Pet Sounds. Released in 1966, it was unlike anything the Beach Boys had ever done before. It was a masterpiece of production and songwriting. Songs like Wouldn't It Be Nice and God Only Knows were filled with lush orchestration, complex harmonies, and heartbreakingly beautiful melodies. The album was hailed by critics as a work of genius. Paul McCartney has even called God Only Knows the most perfect song ever written. Pet Sounds showed the world that pop music could be as deep and meaningful as any other art form. It was Brian's heart and soul captured on vinyl. But the album was not a huge commercial success at first, especially in America. The record company just didn't know how to market it. Some fans were confused by the new, more serious sound. Even some members of the band, particularly Mike Love, were worried that they were losing their audience. For Brian, this was devastating. He had poured everything he had into Pet Sounds. He believed it was the greatest work he had ever done. The lukewarm reception, combined with his increasing drug use and fragile mental state, pushed him further into a creative and personal crisis. The weight of his own genius was becoming too much to bear. After Pet Sounds, Brian set his sights on an even more ambitious project. He wanted to create his masterpiece, what he called a teenage symphony to God. The project was to be called Smile. It was meant to be the next step in musical evolution, a collage of sounds and musical fragments that would push the boundaries of recording even further. He wrote the psychedelic and whimsical song Good Vibrations, which he called a pocket symphony. It took months to record in different studios, piecing together bits of tape to create a 3.5-minute masterpiece. The song was a massive international hit, but its creation was a sign of the immense and exhausting effort Smile would require. Brian's behavior became more and more erratic during this period. He was struggling with auditory hallucinations, hearing voices in his head. His drug use intensified, and he grew increasingly paranoid. He even had a sandbox built in his living room so he could feel the beach sand under his feet while he worked at his piano. He became convinced that a fire at a nearby building was caused by the fire music he was recording for Smile, and he reportedly destroyed the tapes. The Smile sessions became chaotic and fragmented. The rest of the band, returning from tours, struggled to understand the bizarre and brilliant music Brian was creating. The pressure came from all sides. The Beatles released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, an album that was celebrated for the very kind of innovation Brian had been pioneering. He felt that they had beaten him to the punch. His bandmates were skeptical, the record company was impatient, and his own mental health was collapsing. The Smile project, once a source of incredible inspiration, became a symbol of his failure. In 1967, Brian Wilson gave up. He shelved the project. The most anticipated album in rock history would remain unfinished for decades. The collapse of Smile marked the beginning of Brian's dark years. He retreated from his role as the leader of the Beach Boys. He became a recluse, spending years in his bedroom, struggling with obesity, drug abuse, and severe mental illness. His creative output dwindled. The musical genius who had once filled the world with sounds of joy and sunshine went silent. He was lost at sea, adrift in a world of confusion and despair. The man who had written the soundtrack to the California Dream was now living a nightmare, hidden away from the world he had helped to shape. For many years, Brian Wilson was a ghost in his own life. He was a passenger, not a pilot. His family, desperate to help, eventually brought in a controversial therapist named Dr. Eugene Landy. Landy took control of every aspect of Brian's life, from his diet to his creative work. While he helped Brian lose weight and stop abusing drugs, his methods were extreme and controlling. He isolated Brian from his family and friends. During this period, Brian released his first solo album in 1988, simply titled Brian Wilson. It contained moments of his old brilliance, but it was clear that he was not fully in control of his own destiny. The 1990s marked a slow but steady journey back to the light. After a long legal battle, his family managed to free him from Landy's control. He began to reconnect with the world. He started performing live again, tentatively at first, but with growing confidence. He met Melinda Ledbetter, who would become his second wife. She provided the stability and support he desperately needed. With her help, he began to manage his mental health and rediscover his passion for music. The world began to see glimpses of the old Brian, the gentle genius who just wanted to make beautiful sounds. The most incredible moment of his comeback came in 2004. After 37 years, Brian Wilson decided to finish what he had started. He assembled a new talented band and, with the help of lyricist Van Dyke Parks and musician Darian Sahanaja, he finally completed Smile. He first performed it live to stunned and emotional audiences in London. Then he recorded a new studio version, Brian Wilson Presents Smile. The album was met with universal acclaim. It was a triumph. The lost masterpiece had finally been found, and it was every bit as brilliant as the legend had promised. Brian had faced his demons and won. This period of renewal saw Brian receive the recognition he had long deserved. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Beach Boys. He won a Grammy Award for Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, one of the instrumental tracks from Smile. He received the Kennedy Center Honors, one of America's highest artistic awards. He continued to tour the world, playing Pet Sounds and Smile in their entirety to sold-out crowds. He was no longer the tragic figure hiding in his bedroom. He was a survivor, an artist who had come back from the brink to share his gifts with the world once more. Brian Wilson's impact on music is honestly immeasurable. He changed the way pop records were made. He elevated the recording studio into an instrument of its own. He showed that popular music could be complex, emotional, and artistically ambitious. Artists from the Beatles to Radiohead to modern indie bands have all pointed to his work, especially Pet Sounds, as a major influence. His use of harmony, his innovative production techniques, and his gift for melody created a new language for pop music. He built a cathedral of sound that musicians and listeners will continue to explore for generations to come. But his legacy is about more than just music. It is a story of human resilience. Brian Wilson's life was one of incredible highs and devastating lows. He was a musical genius who battled severe mental illness. He created songs filled with joy and hope while struggling with his own private darkness. His journey from the sun-drenched beaches of California to the depths of isolation and back again is a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit. He showed us that it is possible to find your way back from the darkest places, and that creativity can be a powerful healing force. Even after his passing, his music continues to bring comfort and happiness to millions. The songs he wrote as a young man still sound as fresh and vibrant as they did decades ago. They are timeless. They speak to universal feelings of love, longing, and the bittersweet passage of time. When we hear the opening chords of Don't Worry Baby, or the soaring harmonies of God Only Knows, we are connected to something beautiful and pure. His music is a gift that keeps on giving, a source of light in a sometimes difficult world. Brian Wilson's story ends not in tragedy but in triumph and hope. He was a boy from Hawthorne who heard symphonies in his head. He gave those symphonies to the world, and in doing so created an endless summer of sound. He faced down his demons and found redemption in the very music that had once been a source of pain. His life reminds us that even after the longest, darkest night, the sun can rise again. And in the warm glow of that sun, you can almost hear the faint, perfect harmony of a Brian Wilson song floating on the breeze.